Welcome to Global Information Security Society for Professionals of Pakistan.
All right, I guess we have about 25 people, so we can start.
Go ahead, brother. Yeah, go ahead, please.
All right, so assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Rehan, and I've been in information security for more than 15 years now. Just a bit of background, I spent most of my career doing infrastructure security and compliance work for federal government in US and also in private sector. In the past 5 years, I've been more focused on SCADA system security, doing a lot of work with train control systems and electricity and water plants and doing their security. For the last couple of years, I am not a software developer at all. I've never written a single line of code, maybe some bash scripts here and there. But for the last couple of years, in my recent role, I've been involved in software security quite a bit with my new role. So I'm working for a company called Synopsys, and we do a lot of software security work. So my role over there is as a managing consultant, and I manage software security projects when we do consulting for our clients. So that's a brief introduction. And during that job, I came across this maturity model called BSAMM, which is another software security model. BSAMM stands for Built-in Software Security Maturity Model. And I got interested in that model very much because majority of our clients are using it, and for the past 10 years, the company that I'm working for now, they have collected maturity model data of about 210 companies all across the world doing BSAMMs. And the way it works is that we have that data and we do assessments, and then we take the data and compare it with other organizations and develop a baseline or benchmarking for that particular organization. So for example, if we are doing a BSAMM assessment for an insurance company, we have tons of insurance companies in the past that we have done BSAMM. And we then compared that insurance company as to how their AppSec program is doing in comparison with other insurance companies in the world. So SAMM and BSAMM have the same origin. So they started at the same time. It was actually one thing, and about 10 years ago, they branched off. So BSAMM became more commercial side and took a different approach, while SAMM still remain open source and is accessible to everybody. It took a different direction. But at the core, both of these maturity models are same. Their approach is same. The things they are looking at the same. It's just BSAMM is more commercialized. It has more data that they have collected over time, which they can use to benchmark. While OWASP SAMM excuse me, does not have that data right now. So they're in the process of now collecting data. They have this program going on where if companies are doing maturity model assessment using OWASP SAMM, so they encourage to submit data to them so that they can start doing those benchmarkings as well. So that's a brief overview of this maturity model. So let's get going. So what is SAMM? So as the name implies, it's a software assurance maturity model, and it's an open framework that you can use to formulate your own strategy that meet your specific risk environment. One thing about software assurance maturity model is that you have to tailor it based on your risk profile and your organizational security needs. You just cannot have everything, similar situations cannot be applied to each and every organizations. Everybody has at a different maturity level. Some are really young and some are in their maturity level, and some are, mature in their maturity level per se. So what it does is it evaluates your organization current software security practices, how an organization is doing when it's come to development of their software, and actually securely development their software. Building a balanced software security assurance program in well-defined iterations, uh, you know, demonstrating concrete improvement to security assurance program, and defining a measured security related activities throughout an organization. So the purpose of maturity program is to uh, to develop phase approach to where you start and where you want to go. And then you do that in phases. It could be in quarters or yearly phases, but the idea is that you have to grow, you have to improve. You have to improve your maturity. You have to improve your processes. So that's the idea of a maturity program. It's just like a kid is born, he is who knows nothing. So as he is aging, he is maturing, he is learning from his experience, from his outside, from his elders, from his environment, and he's maturing. So that's the same approach towards any program. A program at the beginning might not have all the security controls in place, or all the security practices are not being followed. But over the time, with the right approach, with the right strategies, and with consistent approach, that program can get mature to a level where it meets the requirement of organizational security. So that's the idea. So this framework provides that building blocks towards that maturity. Any questions so far? Okay. So when you talk about SAM, who is the target audience in an organization? So SAM is geared towards mainly AppSec programs in an organization. Obviously, we talked about network security. There are network security programs in the organizations. They have their own maturity levels. There are different frameworks that basically assess the security of architecture security, network security, and whatnot. But for software security, OpenSAM can provide you that feature of assessing the security of your AppSec program. And the people who are involved in the target audience for this framework are architects, application security architects, application security engineers, CISO, penetration testers, focus on application security analysts, application security project managers, QA. So these are the general audience in an organization who this framework is target towards. The last thing is SAM is universal. It is not limited to any particular country. Wherever there's an AppSec program, SAM can be applied no matter where you are in the world today. Within Saudi Arabia, UAE, Canada, US, Pakistan, India, whatever. So this program can be applied into your organization to meet your organization application security requirements and mature it over time. So just before we move forward, I just want to go over what a secure SDLC generally, it's a general looks like. So we call it, these days, we call it shifting security towards the left. So if you look at this diagram the figure that you're seeing in front of the screen, so very towards the left is training. And as you are moving towards the right, where from training to requirement to design to implementation to verification to release and to respond. So basically you're moving from left towards the right. So the best approach of security is always shift the focus towards the left and then move towards the right when it comes to the security. So most of the organizations where security practices are not mature enough, they are not part of the design process, they're not part of from developers workstation, they tend to focus on security at the right side of this SDLC. Maybe at the release time, they are doing penetration testing. They are making changes to their code, which is always very costly and it is not very effective. So in order to reduce the cost of implementing security, and cost not only in terms of dollar amount, but also in terms of risk. So the more you implement security towards the right side of this SDLC, the greater the risks you have to your software. So in order to reduce the risk, the cost of risk and the cost of implementation of security, it is always better to have security right from the get-go or shifting towards left. So that's where training is a core part, because when you are hiring somebody, you are providing them security awareness training. But is that security awareness enough when it comes to software security? No. I mean, when we do these open SAMM assessments or BSIMM assessments, we ask this question very specifically to an organization: what type of security training you are providing? And most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, I get the answer that we are doing general security awareness training or general security training when they onboard people to the organization. And that is not enough. I mean, if you're hiring a developer to write code, and you're just giving him a general security awareness training on how to handle with phishing and basic network security, how to make complex password, that's not enough. So you need to train your developers from application security point of view, and we provide that training. So, and then moving towards left, you have requirements. You establish software security requirements. Then you have design requirements, where you do threat modeling, design requirements, and you analyze attack surfaces. And then you move into implementation phase, where you look at static analysis, do static analysis on the code and other tests. Then verification, and verification again includes more tests, where you dynamic analysis, fuzz testing, and attack surface reviews, and then you release the software into production, and where in that point in time of SDLC, you are doing incident response, you are doing final security reviews, and then you are doing response. And this basically, the response feeds back into requirements again. So it has to be a loop. You just cannot release the software and do not learn from security point of view what is happening to your software. So that's what a general SDLC looks like or should look like. But in most cases, it doesn't look like this from all practical purposes. Any questions? Any comments? Okay, we can move forward. So from the, again, so we're talking about SAMM today. So SAMM stands for Software Assurance Maturity Model. Again, maturity implies you start somewhere, and then using that framework, you grow and you mature your program. But in order to grow and mature your program, SAMM has some core principles that you need to adhere to. So the first one is an organization's behavior changes slowly over time. So when you adopt this framework and you assess your environment, and you got a bad score, because at the end of this maturity assessment, there is a scoring, and I'll show you how that scoring works and how you can utilize it in your own organization. So you just cannot implement everything right there and then, or you cannot implement those missing things in a week time frame, or a month time frame, or even a 6-month time frame. It takes time. It is a slow change, because there are a lot of things that get involved. There are developers, there's environment, there is CISO, there are risk level, there are maturity. So it takes time, but the idea is it needs to be consistent. So the change needs to happen, although it will be slow, but it needs to happen. Second core principle is there is no single recipe that works for all organizations. As I mentioned in the start of the organization, you can not organization, but start of my presentation is that you can assess the maturity of an organization, but every organization is different. Their risk appetite is different. Their risk profile is different. Their type of applications that they're producing is different. There are organizations that are producing organizational level softwares, then there are organizations that are producing commercial softwares. So there are different types of softwares that are produced by different types of organizations, and they all have different requirements when it comes to security. So there is no one single recipe for this maturity model that works holistically to every organization. The third one is guidance related to security activities must be prescriptive. So that is a very important point when it comes to maturity model. So I'm at this principle. So I'm sure many of us have worked with different risk assessment documents like ISO or NIST or PCI, or there are other requirement documents which are regulatory in nature. So regulatory documents are descriptive. They actually tell you what needs to be done exactly in order to comply with those requirements. On contrary to that, the maturity models are prescriptive. So the prescriptive is you do not have to comply with certain requirements, but it will tell you that, hey, you should do this to improve your practices, to mature your practices, to mature your program. It's not a requirement because you're not complying with a regulation. You're not complying with Canadian regulation or Australian regulation or UAE regulation that you have to have comply with. This is not a regulation. This is a maturity model. So all these maturity models, whether it will be BSIMM or a SAMM, these are prescriptive models. Any questions? Is that difference clear between prescriptive and descriptive? Okay. Another aspect of or core principle of SAMM is that it must be simple, well-defined, and measurable. So if you are not able to measure your maturity, then there is no point of it. So you can do it once, and then you just forget about it, and you just you're not doing anything with it. So you're not measuring. So I mean, if a child is growing, you measure the growth of that child by his height. That's one data point. By his mental growth, that is another data point. So there are different data points. So when you are looking at a maturity model of an AppSec program, you have different data points that you can see over time that they are growing, they are maturing, and you are getting into the right direction. But during that time, if something is not panning out as you are planning to, or as you had, then there is a problem, and then you can go and address that problem. So you have to use those data points to measure the maturity over time. So when we do BSIMMs or these SAMM engagements, these are not one-off things. So you do it some organizations who are very keen to improve their maturity, they do it every 6 months. Some do after a year, some do after 2 years, some do after 3 years. It depends where you are. But the point is that you have to do it to measure your progress, to measure your maturity over time. So these are the 4 core principles of software assurance maturity model. Okay, let's move on. So this is how a SAMM framework looks like. There were some previous versions of SAMM. Up till version framework version 1.5, the SAMM framework was mostly catered towards a waterfall development methodology. But with version 2.0, where now the whole development environment has changed to DevSecOps and agile development, where everything has to go pretty fast. we do not have much of the documentation in when we do agile development or DevSecOps, because things are moving really fast. Developers don't like to have documentations. Architects don't like to have documentations. If you go in an environment, they call themselves agile development. And if you ask them, okay, where is your design document? The answer is there is none, because design will emerge as we are, writing the code. So that's the answer we got. So there is no, but contrary to that, in waterfall method, you have to have a design document. People have to look at the design, finalize the design, and then it needs to go into the implementation phase, and then so on and so forth. So there is a dependency in waterfall methodology where one step has to complete before the next step has to start. But while in agile or DevSecOps environment, those dependencies are not there. People are working in their own silos, and they are doing their work, and then everything comes together. So, so the previous versions were, so the previous version of SAMM was catered toward a waterfall methodology. So since the new version that you're looking at right now on screen, it's more geared towards agile development and fast-moving development environments. So now looking at this framework, the framework looks like at the top, you will see software assurance lifecycle, which is the SAMM overview. The second level is business functions. So there are 5 business functions that this SAMM framework covers. So those 5 functions are, first one is governance, then the second one is design, third one is implementation, fourth one is verification, and the fifth one is operation. If you look at these business functions, they loosely align with the secure SDLC diagram that I showed you earlier. So these are 5 business functions of SAMM framework. And then each business function has 3 security practices. So there are a total of 15 security practices in SAMM framework. So this is a general layout of this framework's business functions, and then 3 security practices per business function. So under governance, we have strategy and metrics, policy and compliance, and education and guidance. So these are, the first function is very holistic function. It looks at the whole other four functions underneath it. And then the design function, that's where you, before you actually write the code, you do threat assessments, you do security requirements, and you talk about security architecture. And we'll go into details on each and every of these things and see them individually in upcoming slides. And the third business functions is implementation. So you design something, and now you're going to implement it. So implementation is not equal to here basically release, but basically writing the code. So you have designed your code, and now how you're going to write the code. So how you're going to do secure builds, how you're going to do secure deployments, and how you're going to do defect management of your code. And the next function is verification. So verification is mainly testing. So you have now written the code, you have done secure deployment, you have a defect management system in place, say for example, Jira, where you're tracking all the vulnerabilities of your code. So in verification, then you are doing architecture analysis, you are doing requirement-driven testing, and then security testing, and that includes dynamic security testing, and you're testing your code in various using various tools and technology. And then the last one is operations. So now you have written the code, you have your application. So it has to go somewhere, right? You have to deploy it somewhere. So whether that be in cloud, that be on-prem in your own data center. So with the deployment and operations, there are 3 security practices that you need to consider. Incidents management. What happens if hackers get into your system or your application got exploited or hacked? Environment management. How the environment, is set up to host that application that you just developed. I mean, if it's a cloud environment, I mean, we have been going through CCSP course where we are talking about different types of environments in the cloud and what are the responsibilities of a cloud service provider and a user in that environment. And then operational management of your organization. So all these security practices are under those 5 business functions. So in total, there are 3 security practices. Any questions? Okay, and move forward. So we talked about, we took like at the high level view of the framework. So now we go a little bit more deeper into the framework. So again, at the top, you have 5 business functions: governance, design, implementation, verification, and operations, and 3 security practices under each of the 5 business functions. Now, if you see, there is a difference over here. That each and every security practices have 2 streams, stream A and stream B. So in each and every practice, you see under strategy and metrics, you have 2 streams: create and promote, measure and improve. Policy and compliance then further has 2 streams: policy and standards, compliance management, and so on and so forth. So these streams, they have a different focus. I mean, they call it stream, but you can say that these are subcategories of those security practices. So in strategy and metrics, you need to focus on creating those strategy and promoting that strategy. That is the purpose of stream A. Stream B is measure and improve. So now you have create and promote. Good, fine. What are you doing with that strategy, with those metrics, right? Are you measuring it? Are you improving it? So that's the part of the quality of this assurance program. So doing something is one thing, and utilizing what you're doing properly is another thing. So that is the quality of what you are doing. So I have seen organizations where they have nice dashboards. They are collecting metrics. They're collecting vulnerability management data. They are collecting, software development metrics in their organization, the training metrics that have been developed. They have really nice dashboards. They are showing Jira, and they are showing other types of dashboards and showing how good they look. But when you ask them questions, so let me ask you, what are you doing with this thing? All the data that you're collecting, you're creating this very pleasing looking graph and charts. What are you doing with it? So more than often we just go, well, nothing. It's just, we're just collecting that information. So that's so at that point, you are creating something. You may be promoting something, but you're not measuring and improving upon it. And how do you measure and improve upon it? You are basically taking that data, taking to the senior management, taking to other stakeholders that are part of that program, and letting them know, hey, this is what we are collecting, and this is where we are lagging, and we need to make some decisions using that data to improve our maturity, to improve our program, whatever that program may be. It might be AppSec program, it may be network security program, or whatever. So that's the purpose of these streams. So first one is, are you actually doing it? And the B part is, what is the quality of that thing? Make sense? Or any confusion between 2 streams? Or
yeah, Rehan Bhai, this is Salman speaking. Should I save the questions for the end, or can I ask?
You can be interactive. You can ask questions right now.
Okay. No, great presentation. The one question I had was, when you look at these 4 or these 5 areas.
Business functions.
Sorry, say that again?
Business functions.
No, these 5 areas were on the, the business functions.
Right.
When you see these areas, which one do you see a lot of companies, and of course it's across the board, but do you feel that they need to address, governance first before they go to verification? Because many times what happens is, because I always bring this up with budgets, right? Many companies will just jump straight into, oh, we just need security testing, right? So they go down that route. But how easy is it to convince companies and businesses to say, look, you need to start with a strategy? That's your point.
So it's not easy. It is definitely not easy, because the money spent on security is the money that is not spent on the business.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the biggest problem. So there are only two situations that I have seen that management is taking some steps. First one is, and that is very often, that they get hacked. That a data breach happened and they become part of the front page of some big newspaper. So that's where they start running around. Okay, what can we do over here to improve our security? Or if the management is good enough, then you can do a risk analysis. So everything starts with the risk assessment. You look at their data, you look at their business model, or what type of things that they are doing for their customers, and what happen if their application or gets breached or data gets breached. Only then you can. So that's the starting point, because most of the time, as you mentioned, people just start writing the software, doing things, and they think about, okay, we'll scan the software at the end before we release in production, and if anything we find, we just fix at that point, which is a very bad way of doing things. So governance is definitely must be at the top of everything, because it's always a top-down approach. So if you have policies and procedures, if management has the buy-in, only then you can enforce these things throughout the organization. So anybody else in the audience wants to bring in something, their experience, that would be helpful to understand.
Yeah, I just want to add, to that comment, Rehan bhai. So I think it all depends upon the organizations, because if digital transformation is a bread and butter for an organization, they may have all of this maturity. But if you talk about other organizations where digital transformation is just an enabler, it's not a bread and butter.
Right.
So for example, if you talk about insurance companies or retail sector, yes, they will not have all of this maturity. But if you talk about Amazon, Microsoft, where their services are dependent upon applications, I think they will have all of this maturity, and they will start from the governance.
Right, but I don't agree with the insurance model, because insurance company holds a lot of sensitive data, PII data of their customers. But if they are not focused on their security, then they are at the risk of losing the customer's data. So they have to take this very seriously.
I totally agree with you. Those organizations usually take compliance-based model rather than maturity model. So they basically focus on the compliance and what is required. So their efforts will be focused on certain areas.
Right.
But if we take companies like Amazon, who's basically the business runs on internet, and their applications need to be secure.
Right.
So they will take that maturity model. My 2 cents on this.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
And Rehan, I'm going to echo what you said, right? The key is, how do you tie this to the business, right? And then how do you build the leadership level, executive level sponsorship? Because without that, it's all dollars you're going to spend, and it's going to be a tough sell. So you got to tie this to what is the business value, which processes are the key for you, and then what apps run your business. I mean, if you tie that to this, then you can get the sponsorship. If not, it's an uphill battle. Most people, like you said, just focus on testing, but that's not really adding value, right? And then also with DevSecOps shifting left, if you can partner with development team early on in the process, you might also get some wins there.
Right. Another thing is about this model is that you do not have to. So one thing I want to mention is that if you choose to implement this model in your organization, there are 2 ways to implement it. One is the light way, or the easy way to implement this model, where you just starting out, and the second method is you're doing it in a full-fledged manner. And the difference between both is that you take this model, if you want to improve it, you just go through the things, you just interview people. You are not asking for any artifacts, you are not collecting any evidence in support of what everybody is saying. You just interview them and document them. right? So that's the light way of implementing this maturity model from the very start. And and if you want to go on the second level, is basically if you're serious about it, then you are implementing this, you are talking to people, and you're collecting evidence in support of those interviews and what they are saying, so that you have an evidence-based model, something. So I would always recommend to start light, start talking to people, let them know that this is something coming, and we're going to be talking to you and documenting everything. So
is that BSAM, Rehan bhai, is that BSAM you're talking about, which is like, most in the insurance industries?
BSAM, yes.
And it's not, but it's not applicable only to insurance. It can be applied anywhere.
No. Anyone, any organization that has an internal AppSec program, application security development program, or they do their own development, SAM or BSAM, they both apply to them.
Yeah. And there's, I think, even a list of companies, right, that you guys use as the baseline.
Right. So that's what I said. So we have collected, like Synopsys has collected data for over 10 years. So we have done tons of BSIMs over 10 years, like thousands.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of data. So we do not give actual names or actual scoring of the company or actual how they rate, but we have a metadata that is collected that we use to benchmark other companies in the same vectors. So insurance company, we can use data from other insurance companies. If we are assessing a financial organization, we have data from multiple banks and insurance companies and whatnot, and we can use that to assess the maturity models and benchmarking with each other. So that's how it works out.
So Rehan, if BSAM is more on the commercial side, then what do you think organizations are adopting that more than SAM?
So BSAM is, again, commercial. I mean, a lot of large organizations, they are using BSAM, but from medium to small organizations, if they are serious about improving their own internal application security, they are using SAM.
Okay.
Right?
Sure.
Okay. Any questions before I move on to the next slide? Okay.
Brother Rehan,
yes,
I do have a question.
sure.
I think you might have answered it, but just for additional clarification. So
sure.
For a larger, more mature organization that is leveraging BSIM, is there any additional benefit to using both if they're already using BSIM?
I do not see use either or, because I mean, if you're gonna be using both, you're gonna overwhelm yourself, overwhelm everybody in the organization. So pick one and stick to one.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yes. So okay, so in terms of, so when we do these assessments, whether it is SAM or BSIM, it is there you have to take an approach, right? So first of all, you need to buy in from all the stakeholders that we talked about, the target audience. You have to have a risk-based approach. You have to have education, awareness and education in place. You have to integrate and automate security in your development, acquisition, and deployment process. And then you have to measure. So these are the critical success factors that makes an organization get the better utilization out of these type of maturity model engagements. So if none of these things are happening and you are doing either BSIM or you are using Open SAM, then none of those maturity assessments will give you any benefit. As I mentioned, okay, SAM maturity assessment was done. Okay, what is happening after that? Nothing. So that effort is gone waste, right? So you have to have everybody's buy-in into what you're doing in your organization. So we talked about business functions, and we talked about security practices under each business function. So there were 5 business functions, 3 security practices under each business functions, and a total of 15 security practices. So now there should be a way to gauge how organizations are doing in each of those security practices under those business functions. So that's where the maturity level comes in. So each security practice has from 0 to 3 maturity levels. So 0 is if that security practice is unfulfilled, that nothing has happened, right? The next level of maturity is 1, which is ad hoc provisioning. Something has happened, not very in an organized way, but somebody in the organization is doing something about that practice, and you found an evidence, right? So that is ad hoc provisioning. That's the first level of maturity of that security practice. 2 is increased efficiency and effectiveness, that practice is happening at an acceptable rate, and things are happening and people are taking it seriously. And the third level of maturity is comprehensive mastery at scale. If a security practice is happening, everybody has a buy-in, people are develop processes and procedures for that practices, and there is a feedback loop that is happening for that practice, and everybody is aware about that practice. So that's the highest maturity level of that practice, right? And how do you determine that maturity level in OpenSAMM or OWASP SAMM is these scoring. So every level gets a scoring. So I will show you the scoring Excel sheet that they have developed, which is very easy. And it used to be, the answer was, are you doing this? Yes or no. But doing that, there was a problem. So for example, level 1, ad hoc provisioning. So you ask the question, are you doing this security practice? Either the answer is yes or no. It's a very binary answer. But you are doing something, but not to the level. In the previous version, you were just gonna say, no, it is not happening. Which is basically, if you are doing something, you're not getting credit, although you're not doing it to an extent that it should be done, but you're not also getting a credit of what you're doing. So in that binary answer, in the binary determination of what you're doing. So in version 2.0, they have done the scoring in a different way. So no is 0. Then if you say, yeah, we are doing something, there are a few things happening here and there, you give them a score of 0.2. Okay, if you determine after interviewing that, they're doing more than few and some, it's still not 100%, you give them 0.5 score. At least half of it is happening. And 1 is basically, yes, they are doing a lot of it. Not everything, but a lot of it. So if you put in percentage number, so nothing happening, 0%, you're giving them no. 10 to 20% or 10 to 30%, you're giving them 0.2 score. If they are doing something 50%, you're giving them 0.5 score. If they are doing from 50 to 100% in somewhere in between, you're giving them 1. So that's how that maturity levels get determined in OSAM version 2. Make sense, or any confusion in maturity level and how the numbers get assigned or scores get assigned to them?
I have a question.
Sure.
Does this also link with Carnegie Mellon's capability maturity model index?
Yeah, so CMMI is, it does to a very extent. So CMMI is also a maturity model, right? The idea is the same. So initially when OWASP SAMM came out, they used CMMI as one of their baseline to develop that. So yes, it does align to that.
Only difference is CMMI has 5 levels. This one has 4, right? So how do you translate them to the same model? A little bit
I mean,
tricky, I guess.
you just cannot do a one-to-one translation.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, so that CMMI was one of the maturity model that that's what I was reading about it, that there's one of the maturity model that they utilize when they were coming up with this AppSec security model to get
Got
the
it.
ideas how that was. I mean, you cannot have one-to-one mapping with that.
Got it. And then you also talk about the targets at maturity based on industry best practices, or that's more subjective to the risk appetite?
Exactly, exactly. As I mentioned in the beginning, that it's not one size fits all. You have to size it based on your own risk appetite and your own organizational environment. All right, so is that this maturity level and how the assessment score works, is that clear? Okay. So, I mean, here is a good example for maturity levels, and you can see over here. So in this example, we took from a business function, which is verification. And under that business function, we took an example of requirement testing, right? And so the way it should look like is, and then you can see under requirement testing, there are two streams, control verification and misuse and abuse testing. And if you look down over here on this arrow, this is maturity 1, maturity 2, and maturity 3 level. Now, again, one thing you need to, I also talk to my clients that we have not seen any organization so far that is operating at the level of maturity 3. It is very difficult, number one, to attain maturity level 3, and it is very costly for an organization to be at maturity level 3, right? It is very, very rare we see organizations at maturity level 3. Even at maturity level 2 fully, we don't see them.
So if the model is not practically viable, do you think there's the need to change this model?
No, there is no need to change this model. So as you can see that models and these maturity levels, they do not build upon each other. We have seen organizations where they have in certain security practices, they are doing activities that satisfy maturity level 3, yet they do not have activities in the same security practice where they are doing maturity 1 and maturity 2 level activities. So it's not like that you have to have maturity level 1, then 2, and then you can reach at 3. We have seen organizations where they are just certain security practice, they are just at maturity level 3. They don't even check maturity level 1 and maturity level 2. So you do not have to, in my opinion, and what I have seen, they do not build up, they should build upon on each other, but in more practical cases, more practical purposes, they don't. So if, for example, for one of the organization, we have seen that they were doing all the training activities at maturity level 3, but they do not have maturity level 1 training activities that they should be doing. But everything was at maturity level 3. They were tracking it. Users were getting trained. AppSec program was in place. Whenever they hire a developer, the developer has to go through OWASP top 10 security testing. They were doing on-demand security testing for their developers. They have security champion programs in place, but none of the level 1 activities were happening. So again, it is this maturity model gives you building blocks. You can pick and choose, or you want to go in a serial manner doing this, or you can just run whatever the maturity model you want to with. So under security testing, for example, let's look at stream A, which is control verification. So I'm doing this maturity model interview, and I ask the person whoever I'm talking to for this security practice, I ask him, okay, how are you doing your vulnerability testing, right? So they say we do testing here and there, but we do not have a formal vulnerability management program in place. We look at basic vulnerabilities and other security issues. Okay, my next question is, how do you find those things? Well, we just run, Zap proxy or Burp proxy at the runtime, and there we get our results. So that's a very basic level of maturity of this control that they test for standard security controls. And standard security controls may include, top 10, OWASP top 10, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and things of that nature. So that's their maturity level in stream A. If they are doing misuse and abuse testing, and if they're performing security and fuzzing testing, okay, so they are at maturity level 1. The program they are doing it on ad hoc basis, right? There is no formal requirement in place. So that's a very low maturity of the security testing. Level 2 would be, I asked them a question, okay, what are you doing for your requirement testing or security testing? They're saying, oh, we have an implementation review that we discovered application, and we do look at specific risks against the security requirements, and we have developed test cases for known security requirements. So we are doing something, and not only we are running opportunistic scans, but we have test cases now. And we take those test cases and we determine their security requirements. And then we also doing create and test abuse cases, not only the use cases, but abuse cases against business logic and flaw testing of the application. So they are at maturity level 2. So they are doing something, and they have something formal in place. Maturity level 3 would be maintain the application security level after bug fixes, changes, or during maintenance. So a lot of times you have seen a change request comes in. Okay, so we need to make a change to the code. But are you doing security testing? Is security testing part of your change request? If it is not, then you're not doing maturity level 3 implementation of that security practice, because change requirements should and must include security testing. I mean, you're introducing a new code into an application, right? And have you tested that new code is causing any more vulnerabilities into the code? If you're not doing it, then you're not maturity level 3. But contrary to that, if you are doing it, then you are at maturity level 3. So now, maturity level 3, you are doing vulnerability testing, you are doing abuse and misuse case testing, you have your security requirements, and you're developing test cases, security cases based on your test cases. And then you have change management program in place that also looks for security testing after you introduce new code into your application. And then in stream B, are you using denial of service and security stress testing? So now the application is in production. What if somebody is doing DDoS attack against your application? Are you doing security stress testing? So all those things, you can see the building blocks of here of maturity, right? So if you are at maturity level 3, then you're golden. But if you're doing something, maturity level 1, then at least you're doing something. And if you're doing nothing, then you're at maturity level 0.
So I have a question for maturity level 3.
Sure.
If we have to adopt, or if we say that we are at maturity level 3, and if there is any change request, do we have to do from scratch all the security assessment, or only for that part for which there was a change induced in the system?
Right. So that's the decision that you have to make with your business folks and with your management, and also based on the risk appetite. So in most of the extremely high risk applications, sometimes you have to do the whole testing again. But generally, which is very costly, right? I mean, if you're doing the whole testing again of the application, it's costly, not in terms of resources, but maybe in terms of your dollar amount as well. And so that's a risk-based decision. And more than often, people just test the change. So if there's a new line of code, say for example, you introduce 1,000 line of code in the application, then you just test that 1,000 line of code in the application and call it a day.
And Rehan, that's even more true with the microservices architecture. You only test that microservices and integration points.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, previously with the monolithic applications where the previous architecture where all the codes reside at one place, so the business logic and the front end and the back end is all stored in one single location. But now with microservices architecture where every function in an application has its own microservice and their own code. So basically, people are just testing that specific code if a new feature is introduced. So for example, there is a microservice that is just using username and for authentication that is right now just using username and password for authentication of its user. But now you're improving that microservice and adding two-factor authentication to it, right? You added a feature to your authentication of your application. So there's a change. So now you're going to test only that piece rather than the rest of the application or other microservices. So that's how you optimize testing. So with new architectures, your testing is also getting optimized.
So in the beginning of this session, you said that maturity level 3 is rarely any company complies.
Right.
By that you mean they even don't test the security aspect of that particular change request?
So maturity level is per security practice, right? So they might achieve security. So these are the practice that we, hold on. So these are the practices that I'm talking about. So each practice has its own maturity level. So maybe they are at maturity level 1 on strategy and metrics, but they might be at maturity level 3 in their environment management security practice, right? So it can be all over the place. So you have to remember that maturity level is per practice.
Okay.
Scoring is per practice, and then it adds up in a cumulative scoring when we look at the scoring chart. Okay.
Okay.
So this is what they call a SAMM toolbox. So when you start doing this engagement, OWASP SAMM provide you this toolbox, which is an Excel-based tool where all the security practices are listed. So if you look at the top, this is the business function. Under that business function, you have that security practice, which is security and metrics right there. Under that security practice, you have questions that you ask, and then you record the answers. And as you're and these are drop downs. If you can see this arrow over here, right there, you click on it and it will provide you those answers, and those answers are these right here. No, few, some, at least half, at least many more. So that's part of this thing. And once you select those, it automatically calculates and assigns score for each and every question in this sheet. And then you have this on the left side, you have this stream. And then right next to that, you have levels 1, 2, and 3 over here. And then you move on to the stream for security and metrics. There are 2 streams: create and promote, and measure and improve. We have seen that. So you are looking at just one practice over here under governance, under security and metrics. And this is how it is organized. Make sense? And this is the same pattern for all security practice in this toolbox. Okay.
Rehan,
yes.
Rehan, I was distracted when you introduced this. Is this available publicly, or can this be shared, or is it proprietary?
Yes. So OWASP SAMM is all open source. Everything is available. I'll show you where you can get it, and everything is available, and I can share it after the meeting as well. And I'll provide you the links actually where you can download. Okay. And this is the dashboard. So once you once you are going through the questionnaire and you're recording information, recording maturity level, this area in that sheet automatically gets populated with the answers and the drop down that you have. And it will show you these are business functions. Under each business function, you have security practices and what is your current state, and these are your maturity levels, right? So it will show you, so like over here, you can see in governance, education, and guidance, in maturity level 1, they score 0.13. In 2, they have no scoring. But if you look at security maturity level 3, they score 0.75 over there. Sorry, 0.63, right? So as you can see, they might not have any maturity level 2 activity over here. They scored 0, but they score quite high in level 3 maturity in education and guidance. So that's what I was saying. So that this, to be at high point, is not depending upon 2 and 1, and 2 is not depending upon 1. These maturity levels are independent of each other. Make sense? And then this is broken down in from practice point of view, and then over here it will calculate the overall score of each function. So governance is at 0.79, design is at 1.29, implementation is 0.38, verification is 1.25, and operation is 1.08. So this is the overall business function scoring over here. This is broken down by security practice, and this is cumulative business function scoring. Okay. Okay, before we move on to typical approach, any questions? And if you guys want to take a 5 minutes break or anything?
I do have one.
Sure.
Yeah, hello, brother. So the question I have is the chart you just showed.
Sure.
Is that the one same as Concord?
So this is the chart right here that I was talking about. And then once you start this engagement, you type in your basic information over here. And then let's look at strategy and metrics for this particular, this is already pre-filled. So they have, you ask them questions, you have captured the risk appetite of your organization. So these are the questions you ask, right? And how you can get these questions. So let me show you the main document. So they have this. I'm opening it up right now. So you can download this document, which is actual OWASP SAMM document. And it has everything listed here. And if you want to study and read and understand more about the essence of each and every security practice and what is to be expected, you can actually read it. So it will provide you each and every information that you need to know in order to prepare for OWASP SAMM engagement, right? So it takes some time to read and understand it. And then once you understand it, then you can ask intelligent questions. So for example, strategy and metrics, SM1, that they have these abbreviations assigned to them as well. Stream 1, identify an organization's risk appetite. So what is the benefit of this stream? Common understanding of your organization's security posture. And then it will give you whole detail about what does it mean? What is the gist of this control? Then it will provide you an example of assessment questions. Do you understand the enterprise-wide risk appetite for your organization? So if I'm talking to CISO, I mean, usually these questions are asked to CISO. So you ask them question, do you understand the enterprise-wide risk appetite for our application? And these are the possible answers that he can get. And then this is the quality criteria underneath it. I mean, they are saying, yes, they are doing it, as I mentioned earlier, but what they are doing with it, right? And that's where the quality aspect comes in. You capture the risk appetite of organizations, executive leadership, okay? The organization leadership vet and improve the set of risk, okay? You identify the main business and technical threat to your organization, okay? And you document risk and store them in accessible location. So if these things are met, then you have to determine what is the quality of this control, right? And if you go back over here, these are the same thing. And then you can take an answer over here. If you just say no, you see the score changes to 0 over here. And if you are saying yes, if we do basic risk, then score increases. If you say, yeah, we do, yes, cover most significant risks, yes, this risk score increases. And if you're doing this, then you're going to get a score of 1, which is the highest maturity level.
Rehan, so
Yes.
when we're talking about these questions and the risk appetite,
right?
Are you considering the overall risk appetite, or is it specific to application security?
So we asked this question. So we asked this question that how do you determine the or if you determine, the first question is, do you have risk profile established for each and every application? If the answer is yes, okay, how do you determine the risk appetite or risk profile of your application? So the answer may vary. Okay, if the application is internal, the risk is low. If the application is internet facing, the risk is high. And the application store a specific type of data, maybe PII data, so the risk is high. And so these are the questions. Another answer would be from very monetary point of view. Okay, if we lose this application, we're going to have $1 billion, $1 million lawsuit on our hand. So the risk of this application is really high. So every organization have different approach to determine their risk. So it doesn't matter how do they come about with their high, medium, and low risk profile. As long as they are doing it and they understand it, that's what's important.
Now, when it says governance, does that mean that, as an AppSec guy, I would do this, or I would give this to the governance team?
So that's a very good question. So when we set up these interviews, so these interviews usually span over a time of minimum of 3 days to a week, right? And what we do is that we identify different stakeholders and we schedule them out differently throughout the week. So the way I approach these interviews, I set up the interviews. I know who is the CISO. I know we first identify, okay, who is in charge of AppSec. We determine their line of reporting. Okay, this is the AppSec leader who reports to CISO, and the CISO reports to CIO. So now, since we are doing asking questions which are very focused on governance, okay, we need to talk to the people who are in leadership position. We're going to talk to AppSec team lead. Okay, we set up interview with them, and we only ask questions that are relevant to them. We do not ask any other questions to them from this SAMM questionnaire, right? And then, okay, I need to talk to the guys who are responsible for software development. Okay, so now I need to talk to architects. I need to talk to software developers. I need to talk to software project leads. So I set up interviews them, and before I start the interview, I ask them their each and every role, what their role is inside the organization. So once they explain their role, I have an idea now at that point as to what type of questions I need to ask from the SAMM documentation to get the right responses, right? So you have to do that homework. It's just not like you take this and you just asking questions. You need to know your audience, and you need to know the questions that you need to ask to your audience. Only then you'll be able to collect a quality data.
Gotcha. And how often do you do this? Kind of like on a quarterly basis?
As I mentioned, depends upon the organization. So when we do the BSIMM engagement or SAMM engagement, the whole engagement is minimum from 2 to maximum 3 weeks. That includes the planning, the interview, and then documenting the report. And then we do a report readout with our clients, right? And then we discuss what we have done. We discuss the recommendations and where they can improve. And then we provide them a phased approach that in Q1, they need to do this, Q2, they need to do this, 4 and 5, and this is how they need to mature their program over time. And what happens is that they take that plan, and usually they take that plan and they go to their senior leaderships. That would be CISOs and CIOs, right? And that's where they use that data to make a case for more resources, for more budget, and more emphasis on security by now understanding where they're lacking. So they can direct their resources and help make that decisions in their organization.
So Rehan, as part of the roadmap that you you just kind of develop a target operating model and then you have a roadmap. Right. How prescriptive is the roadmap? So what happens between when you deliver, after the 3-week engagement, you deliver the target operating model and the roadmap? Mm-hmm. How much work is required on the organization's part in terms of going back to leadership? Is that a heavy lift, or is it just primarily what you've given them? They take it back to their leadership for expansion and new staff and things like that. Right. So the requirement of BSIMM only comes when there is some internal discussion going on already in the organization, right? Otherwise, nobody gonna come to us and ask us to do a BSIMM, and we don't go and tell people to do a BSIMM. It's an awesome thing, right? The requirement has to come from the client, and usually the requirement arises when they're already having internal discussions about their security. They are concerned about different things, right? And then they start to reach out and they say, hey, we are having this discussion internally. What can you do to help us to address these concerns or help us to improve where we are lacking? Right? So we do not set up that requirement. The requirement has to come from the organization. So it's easier that way because they are already, they have open ears to the recommendations that we're gonna come because they know what they're lacking, and they want a third party to validate and vet what their fears are. So we actually, or whoever, is doing it, go in and, vet their fears per se and give them more information. Hey, you actually did not look at this aspect. Now it is there. And one other question, do you do a sort of an industry comparison in terms of how they're, benchmarking against peers as well as their, okay.
Yes. Yes. So we have a lot of verticals that we have done BSIMM for. And if we are doing for a certain vertical, we always have data going several years back where we have that data based on their SSG, we call it software security group in an organ, it's a generic name, as when it was established, how mature it is, how mature their practices are versus what you are doing right now and where you should be. So yes, so that comparison is there. And that's where OWASP SAMM is lacking a little bit because they do not have that historical data for benchmarking. Now they have opened up an avenue where companies can provide that data anonymously so that they can use that data, and they have defined the full data scheme that you can use if you are willing to contribute to this project by doing this assessment internally in your organization. They provide you the complete data model. You fill that data in that model and submit to OWASP. So where they start building that benchmarking database.
Thank you. It's awesome. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Rehan, this is Tariq from Pakistan. I just wanted to understand that what sort of an organization should go for it. What I mean to say is our prime business is not software development. We are a university. But in a university, service-oriented architecture for IST, for the information services we provide. So we have other functions. The key function is to provide support to the students. And for that, we have infrastructure, user operations, and obviously an application development, a small cell of application development and support as well. Do you recommend SAMM for a university like us?
Your applications, right? So my question to you is, number one, what type of data those applications are storing and processing, right? Number one. Number two, what is the risk if your applications get compromised, right? Is there a security breach, and will that security breach gonna have an impact on your students' data? on your reputation of your organization or university, or so you need to determine your risk appetite. I mean, so that's one aspect of it. Second aspect of it is if you just want to generally improve the overall software development process in your organization, you can utilize this. But from the larger perspective, I do not see that you need to heavily go for this for your organization, because universities are mostly, the data is very open over there, right? These are research institutions. You don't have nothing to hide over there, right? So, but if you want to improve your development practices, overall improvement, then you can definitely use this, but it's not required, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, so these are interviews. So if you can look at it, this is the first tab, this interview tab, and where you can ask questions. And obviously, you need to be very well aware of what is written in this document, right? So somebody has to sit down and read it, which is not a very pleasant experience. Then comes the scorecard. So based on the data that you're inputting over here, it will automatically update the scorecard over here, and it will provide you tons of metrics, tons of data over here based on interview that you're doing and scoring that you are putting in. And it will automatically helps you to develop a roadmap as well. So there's a roadmap where you can actually put in data yourself. Okay, right now in phase 1, we are doing this thing, but in future phases, we want to do other things. So you can answer those questions and improve your rating. So overall, you can see the progress. So you have done first assessment and you got a rating of 1.88, and phase 2, maybe a quarter later or a year later, whatever it may be, you are seeing that your scores are improving or they are declining. So it's a slow process, but you can see, you can measure over time. So this tool provides that capability. And then you can graphically look at also your roadmap over here. It will show you, are you improving? Are you staying the same, or what's happening? So everything is, you can see over here in the graph. And then you can see your spider charts over here, where it just gives you a high level view of from 0 to 3 as to where your maturity stands. And this gets populated automatically from this very first tab in the tool. All right.
Rehan, you also mentioned SAMM Lite. So do you
so SAMM Lite is basically, you go through this. And so generally what happens is that when we do this assessment, we ask for evidence in support of the answers that have been provided to us, right? So, so in light type of assessment, you do not go there. You just don't ask for evidence. You're talking to the right people. You're collecting information, and you are assigning an answer, and the scores get calculated. So that's a very easy way of approaching it or introducing it into your organization easily, right? Don't make it a burden. Whenever we go to these do assessments, we always tell the first thing: this is not an audit. Nobody's gonna get dinged. Nobody's in trouble. We are just here to have a discussion. That's the approach that we take, because when people think, okay, oh, there's an audit happening, or there's a risk audit happening, or somebody's asking questions, everybody gets scared. What's gonna happen now? So you have to put your audience at ease when you do this thing. So take that approach. Do not ask for evidence that I need this, I need that. Many of us do GRC work, we do audits, and we ask for evidence, right? That approach does not work here in maturity model. Maturity model is not risk assessment. So we are not, or it's not an audit. It's a benchmark. right? It's a point in time capture of where your AppSec program is. And that's the starting point, and then you're looking at where you want to go. So that's a very important distinction that I want to make over here. Do not treat it as a risk or audit assessment. Make sense? Only then you'll be able to get right answers. Otherwise, people gonna fudge the things and they're gonna make up things that that screw up the results.
So one question. So we have talked about people and processes and policies as part of this framework.
Right.
Does it also talk about the tools and technologies that we
Yes,
can use?
it does. It does. It does. It does in a way that when you look at the SDLC and when you look at the road development process, you know, we do ask questions. Okay. First of all, what are your developers using when they're writing the code? What is their technology stack, right? So we ask that question, are they using Java, C++, or React, or whatever their tool of technology they're using? Okay, first question, are you using any IDE level security tools where basically when your developer is writing the code, there are plugins in IDE that actually, while developers writing the code, looking at code quality when it comes to security? Are they introducing any cross-site scripting or SQL injection, or are they hard coding any password while they're writing the code? So those are the things get checked right from the developer workstation. And then as it moves into the source code repository in the CI/CD pipeline, you know, are you using any static analysis tool for your code? So with most of the organization, I think we talked about it before, most of the organizations are using Veracode, or somebody's using Coverity, and other person are using check marks. You know, those are the tools that are being used at before build stage, where just a code is written, it's not being built yet, right? So we talked about that in the technology. And then as we're moving towards the right, we ask, okay, what are you using for open source code that are you using in your own code? Because there are open source libraries that get introduced into the code that developers, everybody is, you know, everybody is using Stack Exchange site to copy and paste code into their own codes, right? So, and they copy like other people comments and passwords, and this happens all the time. So are you reviewing your code manually as well as using automated tools, right? And then code goes into the build stage. Okay, what are you using at build stage? Are you checking libraries for licensing? Are you checking libraries for vulnerabilities at that point? And are there gates along the way? What happens if you find a vulnerability at build stage? Do you break the build? You do not move forward until that issue is fixed. And then as you're moving, how many gates you have in the SDLC, right? Sometimes people just have gates towards only extreme end of the SDLC, like right before they go into the production, they run a burp suite scan or any other dynamic scan. They find issues, they find high vulnerabilities, critical vulnerabilities. Even then, they push the code into production with those vulnerabilities. So then what good that gate would be, right? So the best practice is you need to have security gates. And we talked about when we have that discussion with developers and architects and all, you know, people in deployment, we all talk about these discussions. So you ask the questions and let the people speak, and then you just listen and take notes. So yes, technology is a big part of this whole thing. Okay. So for starting SAMM, the approach is that this is a general approach. When we, I mean, we already talked about approach, how we do this engagement, or how you can actually use this in your organization, right? So you have to prepare, you have to assess, you have to set the right target, you have to have a plan, you have to implement, and then you roll out, and the circle continues. So let's look at the next one is prepare. So you need to ensure the proper start of the project, and under prepare, the activities include define the scope, identify stakeholders, and spread the work. So what does that mean is, so I work with large organizations, and sometimes the whole organization have maybe 15,000 to 50,000 to 100,000 developers spread across multiple business units. So it is not possible to do BSIMM or Open SAMM for the whole entire organization at the same time. So what happens is that we maybe from that organization, one business unit might be interested in doing BSIMM. So then your scope narrows to that business unit. So even in your organization, if you want to, introduce it into your organization, rather than, apply it to all development teams across the board, pick one business unit, pick one team, pick one project, which is maybe a medium risk project. Pick that project where you see that developers have interest, or the project people have interest in security. Pick that project and just do OWASP SAMM for that business unit, for that project. And then once you have the results, then you can socialize that between other groups and other projects and other business units in your organization. So you take phased approach even when you do this engagement. So make it easy to people in your organization. Okay, so the next one is assess, identify and understand the maturity of 15 press of our chosen scope. So that's where you assess, that's where you open up that Excel sheet, and then you go through those 15 security practices under those 5 business units. And you start question and you're recording answers and determining their scope. And what activities are included in assess is basically evaluate current practices, again using that Excel tool that I just showed you, and determine their maturity level. And then set the target, develop a target score to guide you in the future improvement. So you assess it and you determine that, hey, our overall score is low, so maybe give a 6-month target to a year target. Okay, so this is where we want to be. Again, level 3 should not be the target. There is very few organizations that achieve level 3, and it is very costly to be at level 3 from both resource point of view and from dollars point of view. Under this, activities define the target and estimate overall impact. So that's what you do in this phase.
And Shahab, again, based on your experience, where do you see most of the industry leading towards? 2 is the reasonable?
2, yeah, again, as I mentioned, so generally speaking, 2 is where average out, but there are organizations that in some security practices, they're at level 3, and some security practices, they are at just level 1. So it's a mixture of everything. But if you average that out, 2 is where pretty much organization stands.
Okay.
Define the plan. So once you have your target set, then you have to define the plan. So what you need, what activities you need to do based to be on the next level and to meet the target that you have defined in your plan. And again, all that information is in the tool where you can set those targets and you define your plan. And then implement. Obviously, you need to work with stakeholders, you need to work with developers, you need to work with your leadership, you need to work with project managers, and everybody who was part of that engagement in that business unit or the whole organization. You need to work with them and help them implement those activities. And usually application security group, which we generally call SSG or software security group, that is responsible for helping implement in the implementation. So everybody in software development should have a point of contact in software security group or application security group, where they need to go and ask those security questions and help them implement those security activities. And then roll out, and then ensure improvements are available and effectively used, and evangelize improvements and measure effects. Evangelizing means if one business unit have done it and they have seen benefits of using OWASP SAMM, and they have seen improvements in their program over time. So that is the time where you evangelize your security activities and your improvements inside the organization. Talk to other business units, talk to other groups in the organization, and expand the group in the organization. Again, start small and then grow big. And while you're doing that, measure the effectiveness.
Hello, Rehan. I just one thing to add. I want to thank you so much for this. This is actually so true, correct, because I had this with one business unit. It worked out very well, and then afterwards, everybody just started contacting me about the same thing.
Right, right, and that's how usually it happens. Urdu mein kehte ek ko qurbani ka bakra banna padta, and then everybody just start following.
Right.
Okay, this is basically give you an overview of what is in each and every governance and business function. So let's look at quickly in governance. As we talked about 3 security practices: security metrics, policy and compliance, and education and guidance. So in strategy and metrics, we talked about this SAMM talks about how you establish goal, how to establish a software security assurance framework in an organization. It has to be measurable and it should be aligned with business risk. Again, it's going back to you need to understand your business risk, and only then you can come up with a strategy, and you can have KPIs and metrics which are tailored towards your organization. So these are, again, under strategic metrics, you have these 2 streams, and these are their maturity levels: create and promote, and measure and improve, which is 2 streams of security and matrix. So define objective, identify organization drivers. So these are different details. I mean, you can read it and you can understand it, and that's how the whole document is organized. So education and guidance, we can pick a few over here. At the end, you can see what is the assessment exercise. So if you look at governance and security practice, education and guidance, goal is to, what is the goal of the security practice? To disseminate security-oriented information to all stakeholders involved in security development and lifecycle. So that is the goal of the security practice. And what needs to be done? Security to be integrated in organization training curriculum. So if I go into an organization and I ask them, how is your security awareness training or security training program looks like? And all they are saying is, we do basic security awareness training, how to secure a password, how to do response to phishing email, how to respond to certain incidents, and it does not address application security, then they fail. They do not meet the requirement. The score is gonna really low. Work on organizational habits via security culture. So implement security champion programs. If they do not have a security champion program, recommend a security champion program. So take small steps, right? So most of the organizations that we work with, if they do not have a security program, so we see BSIMM and OWASP SAMM as a strategic engagement. We look with these tools, we look at the overall aspect of their AppSec program, and then from overall aspect, we get some tactical engagements. We engage with our clients doing small things. So you do a big X-ray, and then you see, okay, this bone is broken, this bone is broken, and this bone is broken, and then we target our operation to that bone in that X-ray, right? So, and that bone might be, education. So we help organization develop a security champion program. So that's in itself a big effort, So this is how I look at the strategic engagement versus tactical engagement. And then in assessment, you look at OWASP SAMM to evaluate development practice in your own company, then focus on governance business function. And this actually security and matrix, strategy and matrix apply to both waterfall and agile models, and use just questionnaire to ask them. And then you can determine your company score, what's the average score of the group, and any odd ratings. So there are what we call odd ratings, or we call them, in BSIMM language, we call them weirdness checks. And those weirdness checks are that they are doing something which is depending upon something else, but they are still getting a score without meeting the dependency. So those are some weirdness checks or odd ratings that you need to be careful when you are doing these engagements. So you will see once you start doing it, when you start making that connection that, hey, they're doing this particular security activity, which is depending upon this particular security activity, but yet that security activity is not being performed, but the other one is performed. So that's a kind of a weirdness check or odd rating that sometimes pop up when you do these assessments. So we can move on. So there's a threat assessment, and again, they have their application risk profile and then threat modeling. So this is all part of the design business function. You know, you're doing application risk profiling and you're doing threat modeling. Then you need to determine your compliance requirements, standard requirement, functionality requirements. One of the key things that we look at, especially for the industries that are more regulated, is one of the biggest questions that we ask is, are your compliance requirements becoming your security requirements when you're writing the code? Is our developer aware of those requirements? Is AppSec group is acting as a liaison between the compliance group and the development? So to understand what the compliance requirements are, and then telling those requirements to the developers so that they can incorporate those requirements into the application that they're developing, right? Maybe HIPAA requirements, PCI requirements, and all those. Actually, from the PCI requirements, I remember there is, anybody who had dealt with PCI, there's a PCI software development guideline document as well, which is very much in line with OWASP SAMM as well. So you can take a look at that document on how to develop secure software that needs to comply with PCI requirements. Security architecture reviews, they should be part of it, you know, again, part of the design function. So you look at, you know, stream A of that is architecture design, stream B is technology management. So, you know, you go through them and measure their maturity level. And then again, you can use that tool to implement that. And then comes the secure build and how you are building your software. Are you using third-party libraries, dependencies, and all that? We talked about it during our previous slides. And again, same structure, A and B streams, and maturity level on the side. I mean, this one is secure deployment is very interesting. Actually, I was recently talking to one of my clients where we discovered that they were hard coding encryption keys in the code while they're writing the software, rather than using a key management software separately. You know, Amazon have a key management server, and there's one called HashiCorp. There's another key management server. So the way key management server work is that during the code execution, instead of storing keys in the code or storing secrets in the code, all those things are stored in these walls or secret management servers, and code actually via API call these servers and get that information, use it, and in a tokenized format, and then do authentication, whatever it needs to be done. But obviously, one of the bad practices, developers storing encryption keys and passwords and other sensitive information in the code, right? So that's a secure deployment practice. So you ask these questions during interview. Okay, so defect management. Most of the people, there are different defect management tools that are out there. Very popular tool is that everybody is using is Jira in the field. Everybody is reporting defects in Jira to socialize. People look at those defects and pick up those, and developers work on fixing those things. And defects come from various sources. It could be from static analysis tools like Veracode, Coverity, or whatnot, or using dynamic analysis, using Zap proxy, Burp proxy, IBM tools, Fortify. So all those tools, they are generating defects. They're scanning the software and generating defects, and you have to make sure that they are collected in a central place for somebody to look at and take action upon. So again, it has its own, stream A and stream B and maturity level. So like at maturity level 1, you're tracking all defects in stream A, and stream B is calculate and share basic metrics such as total count. Okay, big deal, right? So this application has 100 weaknesses, out of which 25 are high, 25 are medium, certain amount is low, and some are informational. That's it. You're not doing anything else. So this is a very level 1 maturity level of defect management. Level 2 is defect tracking used to influence the deployment process. That's where the concept of security gates come in, right? Assign SLA based on security rating of the defects. Okay, if it's a critical vulnerability, how many days before you fix this vulnerabilities? Otherwise, the code is not going into production, right? You define SLA, service level agreements. Calculate more advanced level. Most of the organizations are using CVSS scores from NIST to calculate risk. Okay, third level of maturity is measure and enforce compliance with SLA. So that's where you should be. And at least in defect management, I firmly believe that organizations should be at maturity 3 level, because if there are no security gates and you are sending out code into production with critical and high vulnerabilities, then there's a problem. It's a huge problem. And in stream B, which is metrics and feedback learning, is that use trend analysis to influence change and design and implementation phase across multiple projects. So now not only you are tracking vulnerabilities, but you're doing trend analysis. Are vulnerabilities going up or vulnerabilities going down over time? If they are going up, that means that something is wrong. Program is not working properly, or developers are not doing their job properly. And if it is going down, it means that things are happening as they should happen. Again, same exercise, same assessment. So these are all the business functions, and you can go through them. I think you have a fair understanding. So any questions? So far, we have 8 minutes left.
Rehan, for BSAMM, do we have a similar tool, the toolkit that we can use to do the maturity assessment?
So BSAMM is commercial, so that is not available. It's only being used by when actually get engaged. But the tool is pretty much similar that you see. In BSAMM, they use the same method. Before we go, I just want to show you one more thing. I can show you the one thing is OWASP SAMM. So this is their website, owaspsamm.org. And if you go at the bottom, and if you go to their GitHub page, you will find this toolbox over here. You can download it by yourself, the one that I was showing you. And you can find a lot of other information over here. If you go into supporting resources, you will see all the previous version of OWASP, and the version that I was showing you was OWASP version 2. You can download it over here. Somebody make an app actually, which is I really like. So the same Excel sheet that you see, somebody make a web app, so which looks like this. And you can download this app, and you can see all the business functions over here and all the security practices over here, and it will show you all the statistics. in the dashboard format over here, the score panel, checklist mode, and you can export actually out to Excel or PDF format. You can generate reports out of it. And everything that you see in the Excel, you can now do in a web format. So you can download this whole application. It also provides you how to install it and set it up. So, I mean, if anybody wants to do it, I mean, you can actually do it yourself.
Welcome to OWASP Software Assurance Maturity Model 2.0. This model provides an effective and measurable way for all types of organizations to analyze user who is accept.
So you can log in and then you can see how it works. You can slide and you can actually measure program over time based on year, the month, and everything.
You can see the overall maturity score of each security practices, where the readiness achieved shows you the maturity level that you are currently in and the maturity gap.
So yeah, it's a good tool. You can slice and dice however you want it.
Maturity scores of each offers accordingly. File format. Thank you for watching the.
Okay. All right, so I think that's all I have for today. Any other questions or any other thing that you guys want to ask? I'm open.
I really appreciate Rehan. It was very, very informative. Thanks a lot for having this session with us.
No worries. I enjoyed
Thank
it.
you so much. Thank you. This is very productive, and I had no idea about SAMM. Today, I learned a lot, and thank you so much.
Good. I'm glad that you learned something.
Yeah, awesome job, Rehan. Good job.
Same here, Brother Rehan. As I told you, I had no idea what SAMM was before. I was aware of OWASP, but this is something very, I would say, useful, and the session was very informative. I think my objective of from attending this meeting has been achieved. Thank you very much.
Good. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Rehan. Just wanted to ask. I missed the first 45 minutes, so will it be available somewhere, your recorded session?
Yes, I think it's being recorded, right?
Yeah, so
Right.
we will upload that on Gispp platform, and we will share the link on WhatsApp as well.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Brilliant
Take
session.
care.
Thank you. Pleasure to
Right.
meet you first time, and look forward for more sessions like this.
Okay, great. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Everyone has a good day.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you.